Attention, soldiers, you are now entering the war zone. Please keep close to your compatriots and have your weapons at the ready. If you would like to skip the introduction, please fast forward to about 7.5 minutes. And now, poets at war.
Once, there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy.
Suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her book. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who's got to live in the imaginary time of the story, there's no interval between putting down the book and hearing the knock. But I, her creator, between writing the first part of that sentence and the second, may have gone out for an hour's walk and spent the whole hour thinking about Mary.
We make things by the law in which we are made. We create because we are created.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all in the darkness bind them.
Tolkien and Lewis, both in their way, lifted me out of this world to show me a thundering beauty. And when I read the last sentence and came tumbling back to earth, I could still hear the peal. I hear it to this day. God allowed those stories to lift the veil on the imaginary world to show me the real world behind it, which ended up being, in the end, the one I was already in. The real world, at least in part, isn't out there somewhere, nor is it in my mind. It's here, right under my feet, all around me. Tolkien and Lewis held the fabric of Narnia or Middle-earth in one hand and clutched our world in the other, building a bridge across which we could set out for perilous realms and yet return safely with some of the beauty we found there.
My first and last philosophy, that which I believe in with unbroken certainty, I learnt in the nursery. I generally learnt it from a nurse, that is, from the solemn and star-appointed priestess at once of democracy and tradition. The things I believed most then, the things I believe most now, are the things called fairy tales.
We live in a moment that's unlike any other moment, a moment of bizarre tyranny, a moment of overreach.
I was nearly torn apart by a crazy doctor.
A moment of fear. It's like, and how are we living? How are we standing up in this moment?
I was made a slave by a bunch of mangy pirates.
Are we full of joy? Like, are we characters who are full of joy and unafraid?
I'm eaten. Got that? Eaten by a fire-breathing dragon. And not to mention being tossed, squashed, and scared practically to death.
It's like, how do we image God in this particular narrative in which we've been placed, in this chapter? And we get trained for that by reading about Sam and Frodo and Aragorn and Gandalf, and reading, Charlotte's Web and Animal Farm, and reading about Prince Caspian. Like, when you're little, you read those things and you read stories when you're older, and it reinforces what is the courageous action of a character in this moment.
Yet you stand before me.
Well, yeah.
Think, boy. What kind of an adventure would you have had if I brought you here with a turn of the page?
I wept bitterly, and then I said to myself, when everything happens quite miserably, then He sends help. I have always read so. People must first of all suffer a great deal before they can bring anything to accomplishment.
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the worlds.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body.
minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you'll find him. His father's sword he had girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chain could not bring that proud soul under. The harp he loved ne'er spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Thy songs were made for the pure and free, they shall never sound in slavery. The chains upon the people came, and they gave away their freedom. No prophets left, they then grew lame, they accepted their false kingdom. But one young man saw the minstrel boy, and he took up the shredded strings, and with great love remade with joy the sacred tool for truth to sing.
Alex, you actually did some extra research.
Hey.
And you know some
Yes.
stuff about The Little Mermaid. I have a lot of hot takes on The Little Mermaid in a lot of different
We're not
ways.
surprised.
It's one of the number one fairy tales I'm most familiar with, because it has been so upheld in various areas and maligned in others. It seems to be a very polarizing fairy tale in general. But we can get to that in a few minutes. Do you want to maybe give us a little bit of background from what you know on, I guess, original fairy tale, since you just read it? It's fresh in your mind.
I can.
It's up to
Not
you.
sure that
I can
I'm the
fill-
most qualified person
I can
to do
fill
this.
in
but
gaps.
I'm
This can't all be me.
sure. I'll give it my best. I'll give it my best. How about that?
Sure.
So, as Joshua said, I just reread the fairy tale like an hour and a half ago, and this is the first time that I had reread it in a long time. A very long time, probably close to 10 or 15, 21, just so people know. Long time. And it was very interesting. It was very interesting. I found to be absolutely incredible. Start off with that. It was just a really, really great story. And it diverged from the Disney movie in like all of the ways, effectively. They share basically nothing in common at all. Except for the fact that she's a mermaid and she goes on land.
Right.
That's it. That's really it. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in it, specifically surrounding. The thing that I found the most interesting was the way it discussed souls in the book, and how she was. For those of you who do not know, which I'm not sure as many of you, but for anybody who's watching who doesn't know, the storyline in the book is significantly less for seeing the prince and falling in love and then after him, and there's a really decently strong emphasis on she wants to have an immortal soul that will never die. But since she is a mermaid, she doesn't have that, because mermaids don't have immortal souls. They turn into sea foam whenever they die. So that is, at least my read on it, that's kind of her primary goal. And then him falling in love with her and giving her part of his soul, which is an interesting way to phrase that, is secondary to that primary goal. As I said, the Disney movie and the book, nothing in common at all. So she goes through the entire thing. There's several different punishments instead that the Sea Witch gives her instead of just taking her voice. For example, she feels like crazy, terrible pains in her feet whenever she walks, and that makes her very graceful. But long story short, she's given the opportunity at the end of the book to return back to being a mermaid by killing the prince, who has just been married. She decides not to do into the ocean, but she doesn't turn into Seafoam. She instead turns into a spirit, daughter of the air. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like daughter of the air, which I'm taking as fairy. Mm-hmm. I think that that's a fairy. And it is explained to her that fairies, if they serve for 300 years, so the lifespan of a mermaid is 300 years. Apparently the lifespan of a fairy is also 300 years. But if fairies serve for 300 years faithfully, they actually get a soul and are able to go to heaven.
Right.
So she's ecstatic. Then you have this really fun little thing at the end that I'm not sure if he tacked on or if it was actually intended to be part of it, but where the fairies can go into people's houses, and whenever they see good children, they laugh, and a day gets taken off of their 300-year sentence. Like, they have to live out 300 years. And then whenever they see a bad child, they cry, and a year gets tacked on.
Yes.
Which made me laugh.
Yes, it is a very odd addition.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was just him saying, shoot, I can't just have a fairy tale based off of metaphysics. I actually have to have something to tell kids what to do.
Well,
okay, this is what I'm going to do.
There was a lot of moralism creeping up in his time, Hans Christian Andersen, for those who don't know. And I think that he was trying to do what the other ones do, and he just felt like, yeah, we needed to go with that, because a lot of the earliest fairy tales in Western canon don't really have all the extra moralisms. And then you start to get into the Grimm fairy tale period and all the other sorts of things where people are starting to collect these stories and put them into compendiums and volumes and things, and they always kind of try to hash in some kind of moral. It doesn't mean that they weren't there, it's just that they weren't particularly harped on in the end. That was left up to the parents or the people reading it to interpret to the readers or the listeners themselves. And sometimes it was very hard, like we found out with Sleeping Beauty in this past one. But speaking of moralisms and missing the point, I suppose, can we touch on Disney? Brendan, do you want to dive into Disney? Do you want to rip it a new one? or gush, either way.
I don't have a strong opinion on Disney's Little Mermaid. I could be every stereotypical Christian dad ever and say, don't let your kids watch The Little Mermaid because she disobeys her father and gets away with it.
Right.
I mean, yeah, but no, but yeah, it's I don't want to worry about that. Like, that's not what I'm the most concerned about. Like, it's very apparent from that Ariel's naive, if you're watching it. It's very apparent that she doesn't value what she has. It's very apparent that she's too trusting. It's very apparent that she's going after this guy for true love and whatever, if we want, like, I don't want to side with the people, with the disenchanted people who are like, true love doesn't exist, and like, she was being stupid and chasing after a boy and she needs to be a strong, independent woman. I don't want to go there. That's not any of that. Like, that's no, it's not.
We can ignore those people.
Disney's Little Mermaid was a decent story in it of itself, if ignoring the disobeying dad and getting the prince anyway in the end, and the dad admitting he was wrong or whatever. I haven't seen it in like ages, so I don't know if he ever actually like apologizes. But
there's
like,
2 lines that drive me nuts, and that's it. Like, I can forgive everything else, but
yeah. I mean, I don't want to forgive the fact that she's basically wearing a bra the whole time.
There you go. Yeah, there's
That's
that.
one thing I personally don't like. Like, anyway, it's just,
It could have been better in that regard.
yeah, but yeah, well, that's something that I have developed post high school, right? When I was a kid, I didn't think about it, but teenager, I was like, wow, she's pretty, and I'm like, no, that's not good, Brendan.
Right.
Let's not go there. But what? I had a thing for redheads. Fight me. But like,
You have eyes. She was drawn very beautifully by a Christian, Glenn Keane.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
here we go. But the thing is that you get you asked about Disney. It's like, are there problems? Absolutely. Is it nothing like the original fairy tale? Absolutely. I'm more interested in the original fairy tale with the whole he gives her a piece of her soul thing. That is really important to me, because that just screams to me covenantal family.
Oh yeah.
Which is very against a lot of what would happen, a lot of what a lot of people would say nowadays, right? So,
well, Hans was Danish, and he knew his metaphysics. You know, like
he knew his metaphysics, clearly. But that's the thing. Like, Disney didn't care about metaphysics. They were trying to write a story, and they were trying to write a story about love. It's very obvious that The Little Mermaid is supposed to be about love and relationships. Fracturing relationship of a family, budding relationship of romance. You're working towards someone, and the Ursula the Sea Witch, who is like, how is she not like 10 million red flags? I don't know, but whatever.
Well, let me just,
way worse in the book.
Let me butt in and say, I think that Mermaid, all versions of it, including Disney, are less about the relationships and more about the identity and the personal identity of the mermaid. I would argue that this is something that the left has been trying to hijack for a long time. I think we see a little bit of it in Disney's version, but I don't think it's as overt as people like to say it is. The 2 major overt lines are Ariel in the song Part of Your World, Betcha on land they understand that they don't reprimand their daughters, bright young women sick of swimming, ready to stand. And the other one is Sebastian at the very end, speaking to King Triton. I have no idea how he didn't lose his head over this line, but children got to be free to live their own life. And it's like, in the context of everything that's going on, no sir, what are you soapboxing about, Sebastian, and how is the king not killing you?
Sebastian, but that's yeah, well, it's supposed to play off as Sebastian finally getting a correct line where he's been a joke the whole time, but it's like,
it falls so flat.
No, sir. You're still wrong. I'm sorry.
But
it's just that the story happens to agree with you at this point.
Right. And Disney wanted to make things more about the relationships, because they thought that would be more, applicable, especially. And when you look at the previous Disney princess movies, there was a lot of stuff involving family and disputes among family and the fracturing and all that other stuff, and they were trying to fit it more into the Disney formula. Whereas obviously Hans Christian Andersen's is this big metaphysical epic, and honestly a bunch of his fairy tales really are just like jam-packed, compressed metaphysical epics. I mean, you look at the Little Match Girl, you look at the Steadfast Tin Soldier, you look at some of these other famous ones from Hans Christian Andersen, and that's kind of and a lot of them are about identity too, like The Ugly Duckling. These are metaphysical epics about anthropology and identity. That's the way that Hans wrote, and he was trying to bring big ideas down to little kid level.
Sure. Like I'm willing to, I'm willing to give that with. Oh shoot! I had a thought, but I lost it. Relationships, and stories. If you're aiming a story at a kid, I think The Little Mermaid was aimed for older kids, because at a certain point, older kids, maybe young teens, maybe, but because what child hasn't at some point felt, Mom, Dad, you don't get it, you don't get me, right? That's what they were aiming for, because as much as like, I grew up in a good family, there were points where I didn't want to do what Mom and Dad told me to do, and I was, there's that, so that is something that kids can really,
I'm not being taken seriously is what it really
I'm not being
is.
I'm not being taken seriously. There you go. That's the phrase.
I see that much more in Disney's version than Hans's, but going off Disney, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going off of Disney at this
I figured
point.
you were. I was just making sure. Yeah.
No. Yeah, no. In Disney's, it's very much I'm not being taken seriously. I want to be taken seriously, and that is a decent. I would argue that is a very good motivation for a character when you're writing.
Yeah, definitely.
But you just need to make sure that the events don't confirm that the character is taken seriously, or have the character grow in such a way so that they deserve to be taken seriously. And maybe don't write the dad as the jerk. Let the dad doesn't have to take them seriously in the beginning.
Right.
But when the person, but make sure that the older person, the father, the mother, the whoever, the figure in that taking that role, make sure that maybe they make a mistake. It's totally fine to have them make a mistake with a judgment call or whatever, but don't have the solution be to like completely do a 180 flip.
Right.
Like they can admit, I made a mistake when I was doing this call. I didn't handle it the way I should have, but you shouldn't have done that still.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what's really, really good about doing this? The movie Arthur Christmas. Hey, have either of you guys seen that?
Not seen that.
You should really
I've
see it.
I've heard
if
a lot
you get
about
a
it.
chance.
I have not seen it.
Oh, it is so good. It is basically Santa is a multi-generational transcending line. Like you become the next Santa. You're the son of Santa. You become the next Santa, right? It's an animated movie made in Britain. Really, really good. And there are 4 generations of Santa in this movie that all have their own views on what Santa should be. 2 of them are brothers, but they're significantly different ages. Then you have the active Santa, and then the Santa before, who's like the crazy old grandpa. And
this one,
yeah, you recognize it. Yeah, it is. They really do a good job with this one, because all of them sort of have their own thing. And not to get too off topic, but they sort of are doing greatest gen, boomers, Gen X, and millennials in that order, and their individual relationships to one another throughout the film, and they kind of nail every single one so well. No one comes off as an idiot. Like, I would argue Triton comes off more of an idiot than a mean-spirited character. I think that he doesn't know his daughter well enough. He doesn't know any of his daughters well enough. He doesn't know Sebastian well enough. Like he just doesn't really care, because he's the king and he's doing other things, and he ends up looking like a bumbling idiot.
Maybe mean-spirited is wrong, but for me, the idiocy of not caring is harsh, and that is when it's your family. That's why I was aiming for mean or harsh, was because he wasn't necessarily being a abusive father, but he
Right.
wasn't caring enough to invest in their lives and get to know them.
If you watch it again soon, there's a particular scene. I'm not sure of the exact moment of it, but Ariel is actually like pouring her heart out to him about some of these things. I think it's actually grotto related when he finds the grotto and stuff like that. And he actually feel like there's moments where he feels like, oh man, did I go too hard on her? And you can see it in his expressions and his animation, but he's being told by Sebastian this whole time. Once again, Sebastian's an idiot. that he needs to be super hard on her and nip this in the bud. And so he's doing it. You know, and like you could see his heart break a couple times too. So like there's some very subtle stuff in there. But yeah, it's yeah.
Okay. Weird question, taking us off into tangent off of Disney.
That's okay.
Either of you seen the Little Mermaid prequel?
Yes.
No, because I value my eyeballs.
I have simply because of my daughter. It's not terrible. The sidekicks and the it's definitely direct to DVD.
Yeah, definitely.
Schlock, but yeah.
But it's and it. I feel like it actually has a better characterization of as not an idiot.
You were cutting in and out. You want to say that again?
Oh, I think that it has a better characterization of Sebastian as not an idiot in it.
I would agree.
Because it actually kind of pushes Sebastian against Triton and with Ariel, but in a weird, interesting way. Actually, not bad. It's worth a watch.
The prequel. I was talking about the sequel, but I've seen both.
The prequel, yes.
I like the sequel better.
Terrible.
I like the sequel better, but that's a whole other thing.
Welcome to Hot Takes with Joshua.
Let me say this: the sequel is a better concept than the prequel. Execution,
okay,
I would agree that the prequel is better, but I like the high concept of the sequel. Anyway,
that's fair. I can agree with that.
Yeah,
but I like the execution of the prequel actually really well. I think that the prequel's a pretty decent film.
So, getting back to where we were, one of the things I know, right? We were at a transition point, so I'm just taking that transition point where I want to take it. So there you go. Okay. But any which way, the thing that I wanted to bring up specifically, I have been tagged. Okay, so I don't get tagged very much in social media, just because I don't know. I don't know if people tag people. Is that a thing still? Anyway, I have been tagged no less than 3 times on the topic of Little Mermaid, particularly when it was, in this past live action stage.
Yeah.
People were saying, well, the story was written by a gay man and is this terrible, like, trans ideology wrapped up in a fairy tale anyway. So and the thing is, this is coming from conservatives who've been told this by liberals. Liberals have been hijacking and changing the narrative that Hans Christian Andersen wasn't a Christian. He was an unorthodox Christian. He didn't believe in hell. I will give you that. But but George MacDonald didn't either necessarily. Like he did, but he didn't. It was a whole thing. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. So he was an unorthodox Christian. Okay, so I'll give you that. But he, according to him, over and over again in his own autobiography and many other places, he loved Jesus and depended on him entirely for his own salvation. And it was Jesus of Nazareth, it's Trinitarian, it's the whole 9 yards. Okay, so while he had some weird ideas, particularly the no hell idea, many people did around his time, by the way. A lot of that was Joseph Smith period of time. Everyone was getting wacky ideas at that time. While that's true, he regularly spoke of God and heaven in a lot of his fairy tales, and was very, very interested in those sorts of things. He was a single man who was extremely, by all accounts, ugly, gangly, and awkward. He very likely had autism and or dyslexia, most likely dyslexia, given that he was never able to write a compelling enough novel to sell it. But he was a singer who blew out his voice in theater and essentially had almost nothing left and found a niche writing fairy tales for kids, found a patron, did his thing. Okay. As a result,
patrons for the win.
All of these people who never married, everyone goes, were they gay? Were they gay? There is, and then the fuel gets added to the fire, unfortunately, by folks like, because of folks like Lewis Carroll, all kinds of extra ideas of perversion and everything else get flooded on top of it. And we get all these critical theory nonsense articles about who he was. But by all written accounts of the man, you don't have any evidence. And I wanted to specifically mention that for our listeners. He was one of us, even though he was on the fringe. And do not let the libs take his stories away.
Oh no, the libs have broken through the barricade. We'll be right back on Poets at War. Attention all Christian writers and creative peoples. Are you searching for a place to share your work and receive encouragement from fellow wordsmiths? Look no further than the Broodcast. Inspired by the legendary Inklings of old, a group of writers who banded together during the Second Great War. The Broodcast is your monthly gathering for inspiration, fellowship, and critique. Join us as we share our stories and support our fellow soldiers on our creative missions. Enlist in the Broodcast community today at joshuadavidling.com/brood. Travel cyberspace. Serve the greatest cause. Join the ranks of the Brood today.
In the heart of Atlanta, a city teetering on the edge of chaos, 4 extraordinary individuals rise as the Guardians of Atlanta, an unstoppable force against the encroaching shadows. William Crusader Avery, a knight with unwavering faith, leads this divergent team, joined by Cirrus Cyclone Jones, a weather controller gifted with angelic power. Bobby the Great Phantasma Carter, a master illusionist capable of bending light itself. And Amira Mirror Kadru, a seemingly innocent young woman with the ability to copy powers and knowledge. As part of the coalition of underground resistances against global empire, Courage, they stand as city's last line of defense against political machinations and ancient evils seeking to plunge Atlanta into darkness once more. Brace yourself for a thrilling journey into the world of Courage universe, where epic poetry meets superheroes in Guardians of Atlanta, an electrifying serial releasing continuously in ebook, MP3, and animated video formats.
Let's dive back into the Little Mermaid on Poets at War.
I'm just saying, because the level of metaphysics that he puts into his fairy tales is and biblical metaphysics for the most part, especially when it comes to the aesthetics of pain and fragility and beauty with suffering. Oh my goodness, he just nails it in so many of his tales, and Little Mermaid is no exception.
That's one of the things that hit me hardest whenever I was reading through it, is how insanely bibline it was. Like, there are biblical literary allusions throughout the entire thing. I caught at least 2. There's probably more that I didn't catch because this was, as I said, my first time reading it in a while.
I feel like it is okay. I feel like I need to like kind of go in here because I had not heard about this whole gay thing. And I feel like what you need to push back on is, yes, biblical Christianity. There is a question on whether or not he was attracted to a male, because there are apparently letters that he wrote, in which case where he compares himself to that, or the what was the line? It's like, I languish for you as a pretty Calabrian wench or whatever, or he's talking to a male.
I'm aware of this.
But even if you accept that, the fact that he did not act upon it, the fact that he did not pursue it, and that he remained celibate as part of his thing, that action and the act of remaining celibate speaks more volumes about his sexuality than any attraction he may have had, because your feelings do not really define you as much as the current world wants that to be. Your feelings do not define you. Your actions don't necessarily define you either, but your actions have more of a defining piece of you than a feeling would. A feeling not acted upon. And like, obviously our identity, going back to that identity thing, our identity is in Christ. It is in God. It is in being a man-made, a created creature. That is what defines us. But even if we drop down to the human vision, the human perspective, that sort of finite perspective, your feelings still don't define you. It is your actions, and his actions are, I'm going to put in Christian metaphysics.
Well, I will put on top of all the stuff that you were citing.
I don't know if those are actual. True, right? I'm just going off of...
Well, that was specifically what I was going to talk about, is a lot of this stuff has surfaced in recent years.
Yeah, and so there's a question.
There's a lot of questions about the veracity of these sorts of things. We can do an episode on Hans another time, and I would love to do that because there's actually a lot more I want to go into, including the possibility of him being bastarded royalty. There is a question about that people have. And that goes into the ugly duckling and a whole bunch of other stuff. But fascinating person who had an extremely crazy life. But getting back to Mermaid, I know, Alex, that you have heard my take, my interpretation, and Phil Lawler doesn't like me using the word rewritten, so I'm going to use it anyway, rewriting of The Little Mermaid, because I feel like there's enough of a change in it that you could call it a rewriting, but I don't think that, I think I more emphasized what Hans was trying to emphasize in a more orthodox kind of way. At least that's what I was trying to do. But I want your honest thoughts on The Rhyming Little Mermaid, if you have them, and Brendan, if you have some, if you read it, then you can chime in after Alex. And I'm not just looking for praise. I mean, really talk about my version, because we talked about Disney, we talked about Hans. What about mine?
Yeah. So I really, really enjoyed your version. I've listened to it probably 2 or 3 times just on my own. And then I've shared it with my family. I've shared it with a small group at church, and just kind of tried to throw it out there because it's really, really good. The poetry works very well. It tells the story in a very interesting manner while cutting down some of the weirdness of the original story. You made a slight change in that she straight to heaven at the end instead of becoming a air spirit. Daughter of the air, which, being honest, I kind of like Hans's better. I think that's better, but that is entirely just you made a slightly different choice to emphasize the thing that you were emphasizing, and for the story, it works really, really well. For the much more streamlined story that you put into poetry, it works super well and is an extremely satisfying ending. I just like fairies, so
No, I like fairies too.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's leagues better than the Disney Little Mermaid. For mom, not really a side jaunt, but my mom was reading the Disney version of the Little Mermaid because we have a storybook version of it to my second youngest sister, and I kind of glanced over while she was reading it. And after she went to bed, I said, "You know that's not a great story, right?" And she said, what do you mean? I like it. I said, I know you do, but you know it's saying the wrong things, right? And
she says, I
and
know.
So I played, yeah, and so I played your, so conversation went on for a little while, but I played your ending.
Yeah.
Like the ending of the Little Mermaid, the last two
Shatter,
chapters,
and that was not the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Those two. I played those two for her, and I said, that's a good story. That tells the truth. The Little Mermaid book, the Little Mermaid Disney version lies.
Right.
And that's its core problem. So Brendan, you were talking about how you don't like the criticism that, oh, she is disrespectful to her father and gets away with it. Fair enough. Not the best criticism, at least not laid out the best. The core problem is that it says that's a fundamentally good thing. That the structure of the musical itself argues for rebellion and for breaking the rules and for not being happy with where you are.
Well, but and that's the thing, right? When I was like, I was trying to gloss over the Disney version because I haven't watched the Disney version in a while. I don't particularly want to. But one of the things that we're eventually going to have to talk about, not today, but in a different thing, is how narrative structure as a form changes the message of a piece of medium or whatever. The difference between when I say you're right, like I didn't phrase it well, but Disney's Little Mermaid, it's like she gets away with it, but it's not she getting away with it. The story rewards her. The end rewards her for doing the actions that she did. We can, there were like valleys. Yes, she felt remorse and regret, but the story rewarded her despite her not having to make a change.
Yeah.
And that is, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And comparing that to a story with a somewhat similar structure, Beauty and the Beast, which we will be getting into, so I'm not going to say my whole piece about it here, but the arc of the story structure there is she's dissatisfied with her life in the country. She ends up sacrificing her father, and then where does she end up? She ends up still in the country. She doesn't go to the city. She doesn't, leave her life in the country behind, but she did reach beyond and became, the princess of the country or queen of the area, whatever she did. But she's still in the place. She has a greater respect for the value of the place itself.
Well, there's that,
which is a completely different structure than what Little Mermaid argues.
Well, right, but
even though it's superficially the same,
it's also okay. I would argue. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to Beauty and the Beast. I think it's actually closer to the Wizard of Oz in a way, and I'll get to that when we get to it.
Yeah.
But any which way, as far as the structure, for Mermaid, let's see, how long have we been going here? Checking. A little over an hour.
A little bit under an hour.
A little bit under an hour because I started recording early. Okay. In that regard, let me see here.
Well, I mean, we didn't really start talking about that until like 45, but Mermaid at least.
Really? So we've only been talking Mermaid for 45 minutes almost?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Somewhere between 30 and 45?
Yeah.
So, in that case, did we say everything we want to say? Do we want to move on to another topic? Because we've been doing kind of variety shows centered around a topic, but if we want to move on, we can do that. It's the variety show. That's part of the
variety show.
That's part of the fun of it. Do you guys have something
what would
to
we
bring
move on to is the question.
We could try to hit like basics of story structure, like you were just talking about.
That's not a bad idea, actually. So
we'll obviously have to come back and do a full show on it, talking about story structure with different examples and all that type of stuff. but hitting like the basics of what we're talking about since we just dropped it in here.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little more specifically about the I want structure, because that's a thing, the motivation of a female protagonist, usually female, wanting something more. You also get a little bit of that in your standard Luke Skywalker farm boy fare. That's sort of the male version. Yeah, Treasure Planet, the Disney version of Arthur, et cetera, et cetera. There's this, I want sort of start to
I want to
story.
adventure in the great wide somewhere.
Oh, good gracious. I love that song. Anyway, my wife made the first piece of art she ever made for me, tangent, but still, is a 1:1 aspect ratio frame that has a abstract painted red, green, and yellow kind of background with a string in the shape, bright red and green string in the shape of a rose, and a burnt piece of paper where she wrote the Belle Reprise, I want adventure in the great wide somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It is a gorgeous piece. It's still one of my absolute favorites in our house. Just a simple folksy art piece with the lyrics. I love it. But so the I want structure is one of these things that a lot of the pushback in our culture from the conservative side is on the wrong place. So there is I want that can be evil, heart is wicked above all else, blah, blah, blah. I think that they're jumping the gun a lot of the time with their own children. And we'll get back to the structure part, but I think this is important because it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the structure. A lot of the children are either at a point where they're beginning to accept Christ and the metaphysics of the scripture, the whole world of God, the whole worldview, right? And they're beginning to accept all of that.
Enchantment.
And then, right. And then the question comes in, oh, but you're evil. Right? Oh, what you want is evil. And okay, all right. The problem is you're not showing where scripture says that thing specifically you want is evil, because the Bible actually says that your desires as you're sanctified become more the desires of Christ. As a result of certain denominations and things not thinking children can be Christians, other sorts of things happening in various places, I think that that's a big miscommunication that causes Little Mermaid levels of problems. And I think there's a pushback against I want when there should be a pushback against what essentially is the lie song Hakuna Matata or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because in a musical version, you have your I want song, which just establishes the directly the goal of the protagonist. This is why I love Wizard of Oz, which is why I was going to bring up Wizard of Oz. Dorothy gets what she wants in a way she did not want or expect.
Yeah.
And instead returns to the thing that she didn't want with a newfound appreciation.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's another version of the I want song. No one has a problem with Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Not really. You know what I mean? Because of the way the story's framed. The way it actually says that home is a good thing that you should want, right?
Yes.
Beauty and the Beast, I think, does it with an extra step. Where everything is the same up until she falls in love with the Beast. And then it's almost as if her original world, the provincial world, and Oz actually merge together.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what's so incredible and beautiful about Beauty and the Beast is it's not like, oh, now we're leaving Oz and going back to Kansas and now everything's okay because nothing's big and scary. No. The big and scary is forever changed. And the original location, the original home is forever changed. This is why I like Tolkien too, because there's especially the books, because the movie this is one of the few things the movie couldn't do. the Shire is forever changed because of the events of
Scouring
Lord
of
of
the
the
Shire.
Rings. Right, exactly. And so,
Yeah, such a great chapter that's not in the movies.
Right. So
no, it's also Chesterton.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Though.
Yeah.
You know, I set out on this wide journey to discover truth because I knew that the stuff that I had been taught as a child, and then I found the truth and I explored the island, and it was right where I started.
Yes, exactly.
I tried to create my own heresy, and whenever I had finished, I found out that I had created orthodoxy.
Right. Yes. The whole point of orthodoxy, really, like that really is kind of like the point of the
that
point
is
of the
the
book.
core point of the entire book of orthodoxy. If you can understand that, you get the book.
Yep. Brendan,
you should still go read the book, guys. All of you.
I know I just went on a huge tangent specifically about the I Want, but the I Want story beginning, you know, because it changes. There's variations on the path that it takes, but as an inciting incident, you know, in the beginning of the, what are your thoughts on the I Want story and the various paths that it can take?
Well, I'm going to be that awful person that says you can't have a story structure and not talk about metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Because like
there's the fireworks.
because okay, so let's tie back to Little Mermaid.
Mm-hmm.
Can we agree that Hans Christian Andersen's story and Disney's story are completely different in structure?
Yes, wholeheartedly.
Yes.
I would argue that is because of the metaphysic. Mm-hmm. Now, before we unpack that, I don't like the I Want story as a descriptor for a structure, because for me, story structure isn't based on genre or based on plot.
Right.
Plot is what you slot into story structure in order to see if it works and in order to make it work. But what we're getting at, the point of the I Want is that the character desires something, they suddenly have the capacity, they're either accidentally thrown in a situation where they can get it, they do something and they are able to get it, or it's dropped into their lap by an external force. So accident, deliberate by character action, deliberate by outside action, right? This is broad strokes.
Sure.
First one, Dorothy, tornado. That was not her decision. It was not an outside force, unless you want to count God, but we're not talking about that. And it was, and so we would argue Wizard of Oz is Dorothy. Little Mermaid, Disney version, if we are assuming that she wants something and she's going out of her way to take it, she takes action to do that. And then if we want to say another example of that, Greatest Showman.
Yes.
And then it's given to you by something else. We talked about Maho Shoujo Madoka Magica. That is a example of that sort of. But a better example for that one actually would be Bruce Almighty.
Okay.
For the because God shows up and gives him the power. He doesn't ask for it.
What about Rocky? Would that fit into that category for you?
Rocky,
because Apollo Creed gives him the shot, right?
Yes, but Rocky also trains.
Sure, but he wouldn't have had a shot, and he probably wouldn't have trained if he had not been given the shot. You know, it seems like he wanted a better life, and his shot at a better life was putting on a good show against Apollo Creed. So I think it kind of fits in that.
This is the cool thing about story structure, is that you can have mergers and blends of each different kind.
So when you're talking about what a character wants, like in any story structure, when talking about character, I saw somebody do a breakdown. There are two things you need to know. What does your character want? And what does your character need? And the need is usually very different from the want.
Yes.
So the problem with the I Want story structure that we see with like Disney, some Little Mermaid, is that what she wants and what she needs, there's almost no distinction. There's very
exactly.
little
Yes.
distinction. And so what you get is you get a story that the structure, and by structure at this point I'm talking about the overall narrative and how it ends. The ending is the most important part, right?
Right.
In this,
yeah,
the ending supports the initial desire. If we look at, you could make an argument that The Greatest Showman does the same thing. And yeah, I can see it. But looking at The Greatest Showman, he almost loses his family, and he runs back to them.
There were consequences.
And there were consequences, and to the point where he doesn't work in a theater anymore. He works out of a tent.
Right.
But that tent, what that does is like the climax, and the thing is, he's like, I can give this up.
Right.
And he's about to give it up before Zac Efron says, what the heck are you doing? I've been squirreling away my 10%. We can restart this.
Right.
So it's not the... So it's the story structure. Yeah, the story structure like supports him. But I would also argue that his want in the beginning isn't necessarily a bad thing. He wants to support his family in the beginning.
Right.
And then his want shifts and morphs and becomes something.
Right. Well, in Greatest Showman, the big difference between that and The Little Mermaid is twofold. One, the consequences, and two, the forgiveness. Both of them have consequences and forgiveness, but both the consequences and forgiveness in The Little Mermaid are rushed so ridiculously fast. It's almost like we're sweeping that part of the story under the rug, whereas they are emphasized in The Greatest Showman. And to the point where a lot of people's issue with it is their rejection of the concept of forgiveness. You know, a lot of the people who are liberals who dislike the story dislike it because this man deserved to have everything die and go under. You know, even if but beyond the biography hunters and whatever. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
To emphasize what you were saying about it being rushed in The Little Mermaid, so I did not get to rewatch the film before we did this, but I did re-listen to the soundtrack. By the way, Alan Menken's soundtrack.
Oh, so good.
Absolutely incredible. So, it's better than Ashman's lyrics for the film. So good. But the entire conclusion doesn't exist in the soundtrack.
The conclusion doesn't
exist in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, the conclusion doesn't exist. The entire track list is, as far as like tracks with lyrics and stuff, obviously, you have Menken's score, which is amazing, for the scenes underneath it. But you have Fathoms Below, Fathoms Below. Then you have Daughters of Triton. Then you have Part of Your World. Then Under the Sea. Then Part of Your World Reprise. Poor Unfortunate Souls, which is so good.
Les Poissons.
Les Poissons, which is funny. I was listening to that at work, and I was dying.
Les Poissons is musical comedy done so well. I love seeing... You briefly mentioned the live show like way earlier before we probably even started the actual podcast, but like watching someone do Les Poissons live is such a treat because they can just absolutely chew holes in the scenery. It is so fun. Anyway,
I didn't realize that it was the musical or who did the song in the original. That's amazing. He's Mr. House from New Vegas for my fellow gamers out there. I didn't realize that. Rene Auberjois, I believe is how you pronounce his name.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. But I didn't realize that was him. Then you have Kiss the Girl, and that's the end of the song list. Night. That's it. Nothing else exists.
Yeah.
That's it. So to emphasize what you were saying with how rushed how rushed the consequences are, it literally doesn't appear in the iconic part of the movie.
Now I have to see if that was a production issue. Because I'm thinking it may have had to have been if it didn't make it to the soundtrack, you know?
So, I kind of want to get back to the metaphysics and narrative structure thing.
Of course.
Yeah. Sorry for that derailment.
No. You were right where we needed to be, because we were talking about how story structure can support the character's wants, needs, etc., and how in most well-written stories the character's want is different from the character's need, and so what the story is supposed to support is the character accepting their need and going after that rather than what they want. It's kind of cliche, but it's cliche because it makes sense and it's something we all understand.
Well, we all experience it in some form in our own lives, period. Like,
exactly.
No matter what you fall on as far as your religion.
I've been visited by the oracular pig again.
Oh no, he's been visited by the oracular pig.
Oracular pig. It appears the Horned King is trying to remove us from the trenches, but we'll be back on Poets at War.
Are you looking for thought-provoking Christian perspectives that bring unity across denominations? Then you'll want to check out Logosophia magazine. As a free online interdenominational publication, Logosophia publishes a variety of creative works like articles, stories, and poems on different theological themes each quarter. Their goal is to have respectful conversations that highlight our shared beliefs outlined in the Apostles', Nicene, and Athanasian creeds, as we clarify our differences. So if you want to dive deeper into your faith while learning from other Christian expressions, subscribe to Logosophia magazine today on their website or listen to their podcasts. We look forward to journeying with you.
I'm Ian Wilson, and I create graphic art using primarily traditional methods, supplementing with digital where it's needed. I use a real pen, a real paper, a real graphite to make my art. I like to feel my art. I've always been this way. I love the feeling of a pen or pencil in my hand, the sound of graphite scratching paper, and I love the sight of a nice black line making its way across the page. So why choose traditional art over digital? Traditional art has an organic, natural quality that seems to be missing from most digital illustrations. The illustrated books and comics that were made in the days before digital have an excellence and staying power that is just as vibrant now as it was decades ago. These are the stories that stay with you. Dr. Seuss, Winnie the Pooh, Where the Wild Things Are. People still read these. I'm currently working on my own graphic novel series, Legend of the Swordbearer, and I've also had the privilege to draw graphics for 2 motion comic series, along with illustrations for a small magazine, Logosophia magazine, and various book covers. Don't let traditional art fade into the dust. Help me keep it alive. You won't regret it. Visit my website at ianthomaswilson.com for more info.
We now return you to our war meeting in the trenches on Poets at War.
There you go. You froze. That's okay.
Yeah, I know. While I was frozen, I said apparently I've been visited by the oracular pig.
But, yeah, no, yes. So when going to the metaphysics thing, right, because that ties into the story needs to support the need rather than the want. If your metaphysic is nothing beyond my identity is who I am, you can't make that distinction then.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to have a metaphysic that says that you are greater than the story.
Yeah.
Because otherwise what ends up happening is you either get these I want stories, as you so aptly named them, where the character gets what they want without, and the consequences or forgiveness or whatever is rushed, it's non-existent, it feels bad, or the thing, or you get a Mary Sue story.
Right.
Where they try to write something more in deep, but because the character is the metaphysic, the world has to bend around them in order to make them the highlight in what succeeds.
Right.
This is why the Star Wars, the most recent Star Wars, is such a problem.
Yeah.
It's why Captain Marvel, the first one, was such a problem.
Never watched it.
It's why, yeah. It's why a lot of stories.
It's why the vast majority of modern stories are terrible.
Yeah, because they don't know, they don't have the metaphysic beyond the me, my, I am.
Right.
I am God.
Yeah. Right.
And
honestly, the other factor is this. Okay, we've got all these kids coming out of Cal Arts and all the other places, and they go into the big film companies, and they're doing their thing. And quite frankly, I think Harry Potter ruined us in a big way. And even though
I don't even know what you're gonna say, but I agree.
Okay. Well, let me be specific. Harry Potter, even though it is third person omniscient pretty much the entire time, is a self-insertion story. And further, Twilight and a lot of the other stories that have come out in YA literature since Harry Potter have been self-insertion stories. Harry is not given a whole lot, and yes, he has some, but he is not given a whole lot of his own personality and thoughts and processes, because you are supposed to fill that. Now there is, let me say this, there is a place for that. There is a place for that, but go ahead.
I would dispute Harry doesn't have a lot of personality. I don't know a man, or I don't know a young male alive who has the quick wit and sass that kid could have.
Right, but
there were lines
that's one
that
thing.
he spoke. There were lines he spoke where I am like, "Excuse you, sir, who lit your tongue on fire?"
But is that an ability or a personality trait?
Well, if you do it enough, I'm pretty sure it becomes a personality trait, but I don't know. I'm not advocating that Harry Potter is
I know people who have video games as a personality trait. So yeah, the line there does get blurred.
Yeah, I'm not about to say that like Harry Potter is the best piece of fiction. I'm not arguing for that. I just think that Harry has no personality for the books, at least. It might not be the best criticism. I'd have to go back and dig it up.
Now, would you agree it's self-insertion though? Because that's my point. Wish fulfillment and self-insertion.
For who?
For the reader.
For the reader, sure.
For the reader, yeah, totally.
For the reader, yes.
Yes, I'm not talking about the writer. I'm talking about the reader. Now, the readers become the writer. From Cal Arts. And what is their experience with art and literature? Largely, it is self-insertion. So they are actually now the writer. And they can self-insert themselves into the story. And you just have to accept them for who they are, because they are special.
Okay.
Now you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I see the argument you're making, and I don't think I can dispute that very well. I mean, if you're given milk your entire upbringing and you don't ever get solid food, and then you go and you try to produce food,
take it from someone who has an actual self-insertion sort of character in Joshua Slater in my pro wrestling world. Okay, because this was born out of a time when I wanted to be a pro wrestler and I was creating a story around this sort of thing. Now, I was going into the field where it is still the performance art that it is, but in the story, it's like the real, like professional wrestling is real, right? So the world is already different. And one of the biggest things that I had to deal with that story and continually deal with that story is that version of me is not me. It is me, but it isn't me. Right. Yeah. And I have a rubric for that in Trinity and a whole bunch of other places in scripture. Right. I have an understanding of this isn't me. Right. So someone who's writing, I don't know, Moana. I'm not picking on Moana, but just random idea because it's kind of on the verge of this sort of thing really starting to take hold, this self-insertion sort of thing, where the world does kind of bend around Moana, like you're saying. I think the story does work, but the metaphysic is starting to be skewed in Moana.
Anytime you have a character who is special because they are special.
Right.
You're starting to get that. When you have a character who is special because they are the only one with a power, or they are the chosen one, or they are the whatever, it's annoying, but it's not a death blow yet.
Right, because they can be annoyed with being the chosen one, which they should be.
Well, they can be annoyed with being the chosen one, but also when you're doing that, you build it into the world. And if you build it into the world correctly, it can work. As opposed to, we're going to go back to Rey because I love beating on Star Wars, because I don't like Star Wars. Fight me.
New Star Wars, you mean?
Rey isn't special. Like, she's special because she's the daughter, she's like the great-granddaughter of a Palpatine, spoiler alert, but she's not actually, like, in terms of uniqueness of herself, she's a Force user.
Right.
Like all of the Force users before her. They mention something about a dyad in the Force with her and Kylo, but no one ever explains what the heck that means.
Yep.
And even if they did explain what it meant in Expanded Universe, no one has read the Expanded Universe, and even if they did, it's no longer canon.
Right.
So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, they didn't explain anything. Dyad was something that
just out of nowhere. It was out of nowhere, and it was a throwaway line in an attempt to explain away why she has the abilities and the universe.
It was a we'll fix this later.
Yeah. It's like a Deus Machina if it wasn't. It's like a Crapus Ex Machina. That's what it was.
No, but here's the thing. Because she's not special, the fact that the universe bends around her is arguably worse than if she were the chosen one.
Yes.
Because if we were the chosen one, then at least we have an in-universe explanation.
Right.
Right? Like Harry, he's the chosen one.
Right.
You know, and everybody loves to be special, the special person, but at least they have an in-universe thing.
Now I get to go to one of my very favorite super special characters. You know, this is the you know, we briefly talked on Captain America, but I'll go further on this one. Okay, so there's a little bit of the Captain America thing going on with him, but not a whole lot. Zorro. I'm not going to go into the novel, but focus more on the Guy Williams series and sort of the films and stuff that people know. Don Diego de la Vega in the Guy Williams series is incredibly charming, an incredibly strong, smart, athletic person, but he plays that he's not athletic and is much more of a literary academic mind, but he's still so charming, and you're not gaslit, you know, for realizing that he is probably the most charming person in the Pueblo, good looking dude, you know, smart, all this other kind of stuff, right? Even as his non-Zorro character. Then you find out he's also hyper competent in the area that he's acting like he's not competent in, right? But the whole point is all of his skills put such a pressure on him. This is what Spider-Man does so ridiculously well and overemphasizes in many cases, right? And so the great power comes great responsibility. You take away the responsibility when the world starts revolving around the character.
Because there are no stakes.
Right, exactly. There are no stakes. You take that away completely, right? And Zorro, Alex, you've been listening to Worldwide Warrior. I try to do this a lot with Brayden in Worldwide Warrior. He's unbelievably hyper competent, but he just wants a normal life, you know? And this is the thing that you kind of have to give hyper competent characters at least some sense of normality, where they are a person, even if they have, you know, crazy over the top. This is why when you get into like the gods and demigods territory, things start to break down for a lot of people, right? This is why Superman is best when there is a tangible Kansas boy Clark Kent at the same time, right? And it's not
tangible Kansas boy Clark Kent, and also when the things he is being challenged on pressure the things that don't pressure his super strength and super speed and all that.
Right. Even though we want to see those things hyper competently work out the way they're supposed to, because they're unique and interesting, you know? But yeah, this is we have such a broken concept of, you know, the CRT people would call it privilege. I would call it power, actual power, not what they call power, you know, in the CRT situations. We have just and it's not just CRT, there's previous theories before them in the academic worlds and things that just, we don't have an understanding that the more power that you give someone, the more responsibility immediately gets put on them in universe, and that's not something that you can just change on a sliding scale. They automatically shift, you know?
But that's why when we're talking about story structure rewarding people, that's why I say you need to have a correct metaphysic with your story structure, because everything has its place, and you need to make sure that when you're working within your metaphysic, it doesn't matter what the theme of your story is. If it's identity, you've got it already laid out. Hans Christian Andersen explained this with Mermaid, Sea Foam, wanting a soul, wanting to go to heaven. Okay. But then she I don't want to try to break that down right now, but we're not doing a want story. We're not focusing on identity. We're focusing on conflict of evil, Lord of the Rings, right?
Right.
How does that play out? And even though Frodo fails, his failure doesn't feel like a slap on the face necessarily, or it doesn't feel weird or forced.
Right.
It makes sense. You get all of this stuff built in, and all of the characters, and Gandalf, he's super powerful, but he doesn't use his power because the soft magic system has been established, so that his power is shown through other things. It's not blasts and stuff and whatever. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but I just wanted to.
Not really, because you're still making that connection with the metaphysic, and there's I'll say this. There's no better example outside of the Bible of a story with a good metaphysic than The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. You could argue Narnia, but I think that love Narnia. Narnia's amazing, incredible, just peak in every way, shape, and form. But the metaphysic of Lord of the Rings goes so deep. It permeates every single rock that Tolkien describes in great detail.
Right. Yep.
So you're right. It's metaphysic. A self-centered metaphysic or a Christian metaphysic, and there's no in between.
Yeah.
Well, right now there's no in between.
That's true. There are metaphysics that are supernatural beyond our own that have other ideas, and especially even though it's not emphasized in this way in current iterations, the Force would be a good example.
Yeah,
where
Eastern metaphysics.
There's Christian morals being pressed into Eastern metaphysics.
Yeah, there's
which doesn't make any sense.
No, but we like the Christian morals, so it shakes out.
And that's So it's
Well, also, go ahead, Alex.
Can I try to summarize the three metaphysics?
Yeah, why not?
I am God. God is God. We.
Also none.
Oh yeah, that's okay.
You can go with you could go with full nihilism, which does not include I have the ability to change my world. You could go all the way down to that, right? The world is completely pointless and indifferent. But usually they don't have enough. They're too lazy to write stories most of the time. But
yep,
most of the time.
And when they do, we wish they didn't. Anyway.
Yes. Or it turns into something like Douglas Adams, and we laugh anyway. So, everybody, I will give a shout out here, especially with the reference to the fairy thing, and I kind of wanted to initially talk on that. The theology podcast with Kemper Crab, this past one, was really, really fun. And talking about possibly mortal creatures that have intelligence is so far outside the worldview and metaphysic of most Christians that I'm glad they did. And I'm glad that they brought it up, because that is interesting stuff. And I thought of that immediately when you brought up the fairy aspect in Hans's thing. And yes, I did it more for my version a little bit more for streamlining, but also to place the emphasis on heaven where I think it needed to belong, you know, because that's the goal. That's where she's going the entire time.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, So any which way, everybody, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. We'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War. I like the finger guns. Okay.
For more conversations like this with our 3 intrepid leaders, go to joshuadavidling.com and check out more of Poets at War.